When Donald Trump publicly threatened possible US military intervention in Nigeria over the alleged massacre of Christians, he set into motion a foreign policy drama that blends real human suffering, national sovereignty, and grand geopolitical posturing. He declared that the United States would immediately halt all aid to Nigeria unless the Nigerian government prevented further killing of Christians, and warned that US forces might go in guns a-blazing in fast, vicious and sweet operations. This is not just rhetoric. Nigeria was redesignated a country of particular concern under the International Religious Freedom Act, a label that signals serious US concern about religious persecution. To be sure, if the threats are real, the implications are profound. A US military intervention in Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation and a major oil economy state, would be historic in its scale and in the precedent it sets. At its core, Trump's statement draws from a moral framing. There exist reports of Christians being targeted in Nigeria by Islamist militant groups and other violent actors, and the US must act as defender of religious freedom and oppressed minorities.
They're killing record numbers of Christians in Nigeria, and they have other countries very bad also. You know that part of the world, very bad. They're killing the Christians, they're killing them in very large numbers. I'm not going to allow that to happen.
For many observers, that is a valid concern. Several journalists note that the Nigerian government has struggled for years to control the insurgency of Boko Haram and its offshoots in the northeast, where churches have been attacked, children kidnapped and Christians killed. From a humanitarian vantage, if indeed large numbers of Christians are being slaughtered while the government fails to protect them, then external pressure, including withholding aid or applying diplomatic leverage, could be justified. The US argument is, we cannot fund or support a government that allows mass killing of faith communities. Moreover, designation of Nigeria as a CPC or a country of particular concern suggests that the US policy is not simply about one religion, but about broader issues of religious freedom and human rights protection. The implicit message, sovereignty does not grant a free pass to ignore atrocity. Yet the interventionist route is fraught with risks, not least of them being that the case may not be as straightforward as presented. Nigeria's government strongly rejects the portrayal of the country as religiously intolerant. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, for example, said that the depiction does not reflect our national reality and emphasized that Nigeria constitutionally protects all religions. Analysts also caution that the violence in Nigeria is not solely targeted at Christians. Attacks come in many forms: radical Islamist insurgency, farmer-herder communal clashes, banditry, ethnic and resource-based violence, and many victims are Muslims, especially in the north. In other words, the narrative of Christian massacre simplifies a much more complex mosaic of conflict. Intervening militarily on the basis of a perhaps incomplete picture raises the specter of unintended consequences, collateral civilian harm, inflaming the very extremism one seeks to defeat, undermining Nigeria's sovereignty and provoking broader regional instability. Furthermore, the structural difficulties are immense. Nigeria's terrain, the multiplicity of armed groups, entrenched local grievances, and decades of state weakness all suggest that a US military strike or occupation would be costly, unclear in outcome, and risky. A moral imperative must not blind us to operational realities. Beyond the humanitarian case lies a fundamental question of who has the right to intervene. Nigeria is a sovereign state with its own constitution, its own security forces, its own political dynamics. When a foreign leader threatens military action unless the government acts in a particular way, it raises suspicions of neo-imperialism. Critics argue that the US must not use the mantle of religious protection as a pretext for strategic intervention. Nigeria is not only Africa's largest population, but one of its largest oil producers, and thus geopolitically significant. The optics of "we will come in for the Christians" can easily be viewed from Abuja or Lagos as a Western power playing savior, undermining self-determination. Moreover, international law and norms limit the conditions under which military intervention is justified. Typically, either a request for help from the sovereign government or a UN Security Council mandate in face of grave crimes or genocide. The US unilateral threats raises questions about legal legitimacy and precedent. If one accepts that Christians and other civilians are suffering, then the priority must be effective, targeted multilateral action. That might mean ramping up intelligence and logistics support for Nigerian forces, demanding credible state investigations, tying aid to national reform, bolstering local civil society protection networks, and applying diplomatic pressure. Military action, let alone direct US boots on the ground, should be a last resort, not a headline threat. And it must be preceded by rigorous evidence, a clear plan, exit criteria, and multilateral legitimacy, for example, via the UN or African Union. From Nigeria's side, the government must accept transparency, allow independent monitoring of religious freedom abuses, foster inter-religious dialogue, address resource-driven violence, and reform weak institutions. External actors should help, not override this process. Finally, the narrative must reflect complexity. Christians are victims, yes, but so are many Muslims. The violence is partly religious, but also partly ethnic, economic, and territorial. Simplifying it into a binary Muslim terrorist slaying Christians may mobilize support but risk misunderstanding and mispolicy. The scene now is dramatic. A US president poised publicly to cut aid and threaten war. A Nigerian government bristling at a perceived external slap, and thousands of civilians caught in the crossfire of insurgency and state weakness. If Trump truly pursues military options in Nigeria, it may mark a turning point in US foreign policy posture, one that elevates religious persecution as a trigger for force. That may please some audiences, but it also invites scrutiny. Are we prepared for the fallout? Is the case sufficiently proven? Are we ready to stay until violence is really defeated, or to suffer the consequences if we fail? At its heart, this is more than a policy debate. It's about the ethics of intervention, the sovereignty of nations, the protection of vulnerable people, and the hazards of rhetoric running ahead of clarity. If the goal is to stop killings, one hopes that pragmatism will match the passion and that aid will not simply be replaced by arms, and that Nigeria's people, whichever faith they follow, will live in security, dignity, and freedom.
Fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing.